important to the growth in our American culture, one of which is urbanization, or the growth of cities, and then also a new wave of immigration that's really going to turn our country into the melting pot that it is today. Urbanization came about with new technologies which caused a growth in cities. Now we have the technology to make cities grow up instead of taking up space growing out. So now populations were able to move there and be more well supported. At least 40% of the country's population lived in urban areas like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and we saw that increase even more with the growth of cities in the Midwest and also western cities like Los Angeles. With urbanization came an increase in hobbies and economic activity that we hadn't seen before. So we're going to see our culture, the culture of the United States, move towards something more similar like it is today, where people wanted to be entertained and they wanted to easily get their goods. And so with this, we'll see a growth in department stores like Belk, also with the first baseball team, which is the Cincinnati Red Stockings at the time, what are now the Reds, and also trying to come up with ways for people to escape their job life but not have to go very far, with convenient urban parks like Central Park in New York City. People were focused on spending money in order to make their lives easier or entertaining, rather than working to supply their families with just their basic needs. So this is a huge cultural shift from a more agricultural-based society where people grow what they need and only use what they need, to people wanting more and more and more. And that's the type of society that we have today. There's also a side to urbanization that caused issues such as pollution, crime, and poverty. An example of how people lived in impoverished areas was through tenements, or a building that was separated into many tiny apartments. Basically, landlords took a building that was already there and tried to break it up into as many spaces as possible so they could get the most rent as possible. These tiny apartments often lacked plumbing or where people could use the bathroom or get clean water. And also the city was unable to accommodate the population with their current sewage system. So a lot of times the streets would be covered in waste, which would cause diseases to spread, and rats that would spread diseases. So there was a real need for a sanitation unit in order to take care of this problem. You're also going to see a growth in crime, with many different people through immigration all moving and living in one area. There's going to be a lot of misunderstandings between cultures, leading to the growth in gangs as people try to stick with people that they're familiar with and oppose others who aren't. Also, with the growth of poverty, crime rates usually go up because people are more desperate to get things that they need in whatever ways they can, even if it means committing a crime. From that, you're going to see a growth in the crime fighting industry. You'll see the first mugshots and also wanted lists using those mugshots in order to try to keep crime rates down. Due to these issues, you're going to see a number of the first activists, such as Jacob Riis and Upton Sinclair. Both used books to raise awareness to the more affluent side of society. At this point in time, you're going to see a true separation between the poor and the rich, and it's going to be a huge gap. So they wanted to raise awareness to those. Jacob Riis wrote How the Other Half Lives, and this book was based on photographs. Jacob Riis was a photographer, and he took pictures of people in tenements, mostly immigrants in the working environment, and really displayed the true meaning of this society. And we've talked about how photographs don't lie in most instances. So people weren't aware of this side of life, and being able to physically see it really made an impact on people wanting to try to limit poverty in the city. Upton Sinclair was a novelist who wrote the novel The Jungle, and this was something disguised as fiction, but represented the corruption in business, poor living conditions, and the absence of ways to solve social problems. So this almost raised awareness without people being immediately aware, but it really showed how horrible the lives of mostly these immigrant populations were. So here are just some pictures of some of the changes in the city. You can see the tenements over here. This man is Jacob Riis. Also the Red Stockings of Cincinnati, and then also Central Park, which you're going to see that come up during this time period as well. So as I mentioned, there's a really strong link between urbanization and immigration. And during this point in time, you're going to see an influx of a new wave of immigration to America. That's very different from the first one. The first wave of immigration came from mostly Protestant, Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, English-speaking people, mostly from England. And now you're going to see other populations that aren't necessarily Protestant and don't really speak English. And they're going to come from Europe and Asia. So they're going to come to the East Coast from Europe and the West from Asia. They immigrated for numerous reasons, usually to find land of opportunity, as America was known during this time of economic progress. So often they were escaping poverty or famine, the Irish potato famine, that's going to cause an influx in Irish. Land shortage, so places in Europe where it was overpopulated or where the land was used up and they couldn't find a way to farm or raise money. Religious or political persecution. Religious persecution caused many people of Catholic faith or Jewish faith to move here. And then political persecution, you're going to see a lot of Italian immigrants come, as there was a huge divide between northern Italy and southern Italy. The characteristics of immigrants were that they were mostly non-English speaking, which caused a whole different cultural change than we'd ever have. Also, the religious differences from Protestants, such as Catholic or Jewish. They often arrived by steamship that would cross the Atlantic or the Pacific, depending on where they're coming from. Ellis Island is the place where immigrants would arrive and be processed for their paperwork, checked for diseases, things like that, on the East Coast, and then Angel Island was its equivalent on the West. Immigrants were looked at in two different ways. Employers looking for cheap labor really went after immigrants. They were often very hardworking people, and because they were escaping often less desirable circumstances, they would take whatever pay was offered. And because of that, a lot of Americans were looking for jobs, and they would blame the immigrants for not being able to get those jobs. You also see an increase in gangs as nationalities separate, and also growth of cities that represent their home cultures as people are trying to preserve who they are. So today we still have little Italies and Chinatowns, and this is where that's going to begin. People like to live around who is similar to them, especially when you're moving somewhere where maybe you don't speak the language. That is going to cause these towns to grow. Many immigrants were the ones that faced poverty. They were the subjects in Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives. And they also faced discrimination, but the opportunity in the United States was maybe more so than in their home country. So that's an issue that would be worked on by those activist societies, but immigrants still were able to find jobs and get some money. This growth in immigration is often responsible for the cultural differences throughout the present-day United States. Today, if you look at the United States, there's strong backgrounds in the Irish, in the Italian, Polish, Chinese, Japanese. In our society, even just through food alone, represents that. And in certain aspects or certain areas of the country, you'll see stronger populations. So, for instance, in New York, you see a lot of the Italian and Jewish influence. In the South, more of the Irish. And then in the Midwest, some of the German. And this is from this particular time of immigration. And people felt so strongly to keep some of those cultural aspects that we still see them today, which is a pretty cool thing, that in our country of all these different little pockets of different cultures to relate to. Here are some photos of immigration. Here's like a little Italian town. You can see the Italian written on the window. Also immigrants that are coming over through the steerage and arriving at Ellis Island. Asian immigrants, which we may not really think about all that much during this time, but on the West Coast, that's a huge influence on their culture. Also examples of discrimination. So many times due to religious differences, although they weren't persecuted here, sometimes you'd see Catholics, like Irish Catholics or Italians, that are discriminated against. So you see signs like this. That's all for today. We'll talk more in class about how immigration and urbanization has impacted the overall culture of America today.